Just clicking the live button here and letting it load. Okay, we are live streaming. We are good to go, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joe. The time is now 2:33, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Welcome to everyone in attendance. I'm Walter Sewell, Chairman of the Board of Zoning Appeals. With me today is our Vice Chair, Ava Kleinman, and fellow board members Bob Leggett, John Fox, and Janet Gorski. Also with us is Joe Cronin, Zoning Administrator for the town of Seabrook Island, who will serve as secretary for this meeting and the hearings to follow. As 5 out of 5 board members of present, we have a quorum. Mr. Cronin, has notification of this meeting been properly posted as required by South Carolina Freedom of Information Act?
It has.
The primary purpose of this meeting is for the town of Seabrook Island Board of Zoning Appeals to conduct public hearings in the matter of variance request numbers 163, 164, and 165. However, prior to conducting these hearings, the board needs to approve the minutes from our most recent meeting held on May 18th. The secretary has provided each of us with a draft of the minutes of that meeting. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to be made? If not, the chair will now entertain a motion to vote to approve the minutes of the meeting held on May 18th. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? All those in favor say yes.
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 Motion is carried. The minutes are approved. At this time, we will move on to the primary purpose of this meeting, which is to hear variance request numbers 163, 164, and 165. We will complete the hearing of number 163, take a short recess, then conduct the hearing of number 164, take another short recess, and then conduct the hearing of number 165. And with the conclusion of number 165, we will adjourn this meeting. Mr. Cronin, has notification of these hearings been properly advertised as required by state statute and the town's development standards ordinance?
Yes, sir, it has. It was advertised and our previous meeting had been canceled as a result of the pandemic. So the public hearing was actually re-advertised a second time in advance of today's meeting.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that due to the current requirements for social distancing, it was determined that the board should not visit the 3 sites as a group, but that each board member should contact the applicants associated with each property and arrange to visit each site as an individual. These site visits were conducted during the weeks of May 18th, May 25th, and June 1st, and were for observational purposes only. No testimony in support of or opposition to these requests was received by any board member at any time during these visits. Let's begin the hearing of variance number 163 as requested by the applicant, Daniel Kim, architect, and James Luce, the owner of property located at 3713 Bonita Court on Seabrook Island. The nature of this request is to add a second floor deck on the front of the house facing the ocean. Before we hear testimony from the owner and the representative, we would ask our zoning administrator to provide an overview of this request. Mr. Cronin, do you promise that the testimony you are about to provide is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this meeting is a little bit different than our normal public hearings, but I appreciate everybody being available to participate on the Zoom call today. Before I get into the actual variance request number 163, I did just want to say um, procedurally, when we have a variance request, we have to open it up for public hearing. Typically, that's going to be held in our council chambers during the open public meeting. Um, Obviously, with the restrictions on group congregations currently in place, we're not able to do that. So, we did these hearings a little bit different. We did want to make sure that the public still had an opportunity to review and provide comments on the requests. So when we sent out the notification in advance of today's meeting, we provided that information for any individual who wished to submit written correspondence regarding the request, that they could do so either through our website, by email to the town, or by mailing or dropping off a letter or statement in advance of the meeting. All of them, with the exception of one, have been included in the packet for today's Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. There was one that came in earlier this week, so I will pull that one up on the screen when we get to it. I believe that one was tied to the last request, number 165. I guess in lieu of having our regular portion where, after we do, I'll do a brief overview. The applicants will provide information about the request. At that point, typically we do the public hearing. What I would like to do with the board's consent is obviously, with us not having the public at the meeting, would be treating the written correspondence essentially the same as the public hearing. So if you're okay with it, when we get to that point for each request, I will provide information on who the individual was who submitted the public comment, the nature of that comment, and we'll enter that into the record just like we would if someone was here speaking at the meeting. Does that sound good to all the members of the board?
Yep.
Joe, that's really no different though with respect to the letters that we get, right? They're part of the record anyway. You make them part of the record anyway, right?
Right. Yeah, we usually provide them in the packet, but we'll just state during the meeting that we received a letter of support or letter in opposition. What I would like to do today is actually go in and just give a brief overview of the content of that letter, which we typically don't do when we have an actual public hearing. We just say, we received however many letters of support. But we'll do it a little bit different today, but you are correct. We do get written correspondence fairly regularly when we have an item that goes before the board.
Okay, so just to be clear, you're going to be describing letters that were not in the packet we received?
There was one that came in the last couple days.
But the rest are in our packet. The rest are in our packet anyway.
Yes, all the rest are in your packet. There's
Okay.
one that came in after the packets went out, and I will put that one up on the screen. Hopefully you can all see the screen share that I have up
Yeah.
on the screen right now if you see the agenda. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so we will jump ahead to page 5 of that packet. And if there's anybody who's watching who wants to download and have this information at your own disposal, it is posted on our website under meetings, under the Board of Zoning Appeals tab, with the June 5th meeting date. The first request that you'll be considering today is variance application number 163. Comes from the property owner, James Luce, as well as the applicant, the architect, Daniel Kim. The address is 3713 Bonita Court, tax map number 147-1400015. The property is zoned SR, which is a single family residential zoning district. And the purpose of this request is to allow the applicants to construct a proposed second floor deck on a secondary frontage. This is a corner lot, so it has 2 front yards. So they're seeking to construct a second floor deck along one of those street frontages. And with it being a corner lot, there are 2 30-foot front yard setbacks, the proposed deck would be approximately 26 feet off of the front right of way. So it's about a 4-foot encroachment into the secondary front yard setback. According to the county tax records, the home was constructed or at least completed in 1982, which was prior to the town's incorporation. I say that because there is an existing nonconformity along the same side. A portion of the house does encroach partway into the 30-foot setback. That's on the same side where the applicant's seeking to construct the second story porch. The current structure is actually encroaching about 8 feet into that secondary front yard setback. So this one would be encroaching about 4 feet. So it'll be further from the street right of way than what's there currently, but nonetheless encroaching into the 30-foot setback, which is why they're requesting a variance. I will jump ahead to page 15. This is the current site survey. So you can see, hopefully you see my cursor moving around on the screen. That's the existing portion that I was just talking about of the house. You can see it's a corner lot here with 2 street frontages. The zoning requirements are a 30-foot front yard setback along both street frontages. The existing encroachment here, it's about 8 feet into the front yard setback. And on the site plan and building drawings, you can see that the proposed second story porch is on the same side as that existing encroachment, but it's encroaching less, just maybe a hair over 4 feet and a fraction. So that's what they're seeking to install. We included in the packet some of the architectural drawings. This is the overhead here, the second story. This is the actual porch itself. These are the supports. And then the applicant also included some architectural renderings. So you can see this is the second story porch addition. This is the base and the supports. And there were also some pictures included to give you an idea of where exactly on that secondary front part of the house where the porch would be located.
Joe, it's Janet. I
Yes.
just have a quick question. I just want to make sure I'm reading the drawings correctly. There's no proposal to have any kind of enclosing of the underneath the deck area. So it's not like that's a screened in area or anything like that, correct?
It's not enclosed. Now, under our ordinance, when you have something that has a cover on top of it, basically by definition from our ordinance, the lower level would essentially become a porch because it does have a covering over it. But there was nothing shown on the site plan to have any sort of enclosure or screening or anything on that lower level. And we'll allow the applicants to provide some additional information on that in just a second. Really, the only other items to note are, as I said, the property, the existing structure was built before the town was incorporated. So any nonconformity that exists on the property currently would be considered an existing nonconformity or a grandfathered nonconformity. While the second story deck area will be about 26 feet from the property line, it will be plus or minus about 38 feet from the edge of the right of way. So that measurement, the 4-foot encroachment, is from the right of way line. If you were actually standing on the edge of the pavement here, it would be plus or minus about 38 feet from the edge of pavement to the additional structure. So what they're requesting is a variance from section 7.60.20.10, which is where the DSO, Development Standards Ordinance, requires a 30-foot front yard setback. Again, because this is a corner lot, it would have a 30-foot front yard setback along both street frontages. They are requesting a variance to reduce that the secondary front yard setback by approximately 4 feet for the purpose of constructing that second story deck. In their application, the applicants requested relief from the setback requirement for the following reasons, and they'll be able to give you some additional information on the background for those. But one was that the existing home was constructed prior to the town's incorporation in 1987, that the conditions applicable to this particular home appear to be unique, that the existing home already encroaches into the front yard setback along the same side where the deck is proposed to be built, and the proposed encroachment is actually going to be less than the existing nonconformity. And the last point was the granting of the variance would not be detrimental to adjacent properties or the public good, because many of the adjacent properties have similar design features on the second floor to maximize the ocean views, and the proposed improvements will be consistent with the overall character of the neighborhood. And I did include, I know you all went out to do a site visit, but I also did include some photos and information about some of the surrounding properties as well. So any other questions for me?
So were you just providing conclusions, or were you reading that from the application about their extraordinary or exceptional condition? Is that, it's part of a grandfathered property that already encroaches, don't generally apply to other properties, and would restrict their ability to see the ocean? What you just said, was that your conclusion?
No, that was taken from the applicant's
Okay.
application. It was included in,
Okay, great. Thank you.
I don't know when you guys got your printed one, I just noticed it today on mine. It had a bunch of really weird characters on it, but those are the 4 criteria for a variance, are basically taken from the applicant's information that was submitted with their variance application.
Yeah, and that I got the same gobbledygook, and I'm the stickler for the standards, so it was a little hard for me to try to read through the Greek you have there. So thank you for summarizing.
Yes.
I thought it was something written in Chinese. Okay, any other questions for Joe? If not, at this time, the board will provide the owner and their representative with the opportunity to present their request. Please state your name and address for the record, and I will swear you in.
And I believe on this one, we have on the call, we have the owner, James Luce, and I don't know if Daniel Kim is on the call.
Kevin Wally.
Kevin is on the call. So we do have the owner and a representative from the architecture firm who served as the applicant.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Luce, and I am the owner of 3713 Bonita Court, Seabrook Island.
Mr. Luce, do you promise that the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
I do.
Proceed.
Good afternoon, and first I'd like to thank Joe and the rest of the board for facilitating this virtual meeting. I know this is uncommon for you all. These are uncommon times, but I do appreciate the fact that you facilitated this. It will certainly help me in terms of a schedule. Just as background, as Joe indicated, I purchased this home in January of 2020. I am a current resident of South Carolina, Data Island down outside of Beaufort, and basically fell in love with this house because of the location. If you've been by to see the house, we're 1 row back from the ocean, but we do have the advantage of ocean views, especially on the 2nd floor. This particular home was not lived in for about 2 years before I purchased it. And working with Dan Buffington Homes and Kevin and his organization, we have spent a fair amount of resources and time upgrading the home. The home has recently been painted except for the one wall where we'll be replacing windows on the first floor, and hopefully with your approval, adding a balcony on the second floor. The purpose for the request is maybe obvious, but just to state the obvious, the second floor previously was used as an artist studio by the previous owner. And when we saw it, we thought the best use for that part of the home would be a master bedroom suite, which we are in the process of getting renovated. And looking forward to the opportunity to sit on a balcony, listen to the waves, and look at the ocean. So hoping for your approval. As Joe already indicated, the amount that we are encroaching is quite a bit less than the amount that's already encroached by a sunroom, if you've been by our house, that protrudes out from that same side of the house. So I think the design that Kevin and his team have put together provides to the aesthetics of the home. And as Joe will probably is in your package, we have communicated with our neighbors, and they are supportive of this request for variance as well. So with that, I'll ask Kevin maybe to add some more technical details. However, if you have any questions of me before I do that, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
I'm
If
good.
not, yeah,
All right.
sorry.
Any questions for Jim?
Nope, I'm good too.
No, I'm
Okay.
fine.
My name is Kevin Wally. Dan Kim is one of our associate architects in our staff, and we put together this submission for Mr. Luce. After working very closely with Dan
Let me
Buffington.
interrupt you. Please state your name and address for the record, and I'll swear you in.
Kevin Wally, 1044 East Montague Avenue, Suite 201, North Charleston, South Carolina.
Thank you. Do you promise that the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
Proceed.
Once again, Kevin Wally Architecture Plus with Dan Kim. Dan is right behind me. We put together a set of documents for Mr. Luce and his family. We studied the existing conditions of the house. We're very familiar with the Seabrook criteria, having worked out there for almost 30 years now. And I think Mr. Cronin has basically read some of our statements in our variance request for relief, but let me just make a comment. It does appear that the home was built under the Charleston County criteria before some of these setbacks existed on the street side. And when we looked at the house, we were surprised to find that we were going to have to ask for a variance to make this happen. Well, what we've done from an architectural and an engineering perspective is we've tried to limit the ground level foundation to the smallest encroachment we can. And after Dan Buffington and Jim Luce got out there with a makeshift column and placed them outside the house to see how they would physically sit out there. And that's what Dan Kim, did with that very nice drawing of the proposed deck over the photograph. We studied that quite a bit. It's very hard to imagine it, but we hope that we've provided enough drawings and detail that you can see our efforts to limit the encroachment. After the last meeting, Mr. Chairman, you made a comment about you wish there were dimensions and setbacks and more specific information. And so at that point, we came back and we tried to clarify on the site plan those specific requirements so that you could hang your hat on that site plan. Mr. Cronin shows, if you go to the site plan AS 1.0, can you go back one sheet, Joe? That one. What we've tried to do is limit the physical characteristics at the ground level. Now, if you've been by the house, you realize that the grade slopes up quite steep there. It's actually above the level of the basement. So we feel like, and there's a lot of landscaping there, and there is no intention of doing a grade level deck or porch. What we were really trying to do was to limit the structural columns. And as a result, we've made the piers as small as we can. We've spread them out to allow for a good cone of vision inside the room itself. And we've kept the deck overhang to no more than 4 feet into this 30-foot imaginary setback. So we think from an aesthetic standpoint and from an engineering standpoint, we've done a good job of that. And we think that this is a unique condition because of the timing. If this setback, if we were working with this setback today, obviously the house would have been pushed back, but that's not the situation. So we come to you looking for some relief. This deck is behind the existing porch and existing deck to the south. And we think that based on the community, we think that the existing gestures of second floor decks are very prominent there. And we think it'll be a beautiful addition to the home. And so we would request your consideration for our variance.
Thank you. Before we open the hearing for public comment, does any member of the board have any questions for the owner or their representative? If not, at this time, we will open the hearing for public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favor of this request? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition? Is there anyone who wishes to speak either in favor of or opposition to this request?
You want me to go ahead and read these letters now quickly?
Yes,
All right.
proceed.
I'm gonna pull them up on the screen as well. So one of the items that's required in our application packet for a variance is a letter from the Property Owners Association. We did receive a letter from Katrina at the ARC in regards to this property. And she said it was her understanding that the owner or representative had submitted a variance request to the town relating to the addition of a balcony / deck addition due to the location being a corner lot with 2 front yard setbacks. She noted while the POA had not yet thoroughly reviewed the plans, they have given a cursory review, and aside from the variance setback issue that's before the board today, she stated that she found no fundamental issues or reasons that the request would not be approved pending a successful variance. She added that since the balcony or deck would not increase the heated square footage or due to design the overall footprint of the home, this would most likely only require ARC staff approval and would not have to go before the full ARC. And Katrina, I believe, is on the call if you have any questions for her or if there's anything that she would like to add. If not, there were several letters that came in regarding this request. The first one came from MJ Collins with Seabrook 1502 LLC. Mr. Collins was in favor of the zoning request, and he stated in his comment that he was the realtor that represented Mr. Luce in the transaction, felt that the variance should be approved since it's a corner property and the proposed deck would not be infringing on any neighbor's views. He noted there was already a 3-sided glass breakfast room on the first level below, and that the second floor deck addition would balance out the proportions of the property and be more aesthetically pleasing to the eye. There was a letter that came in from Joseph Penny at 3236 Middle Dam Court. Didn't provide any comments, but did indicate that he was in favor of the request. There was also one that came in from Terrapini, also of 3236 Middletown Court, did not submit any comments, but did indicate that they were in favor of the request. The next one came from Joanna Farrell on May 15th. Ms. Farrell resides at 3076 Marshgate Drive. Did not submit any comments, but did indicate support for the variance request. The next one was from Mariana Price from May 15th. Ms. Price resides at 1009 Embassy Row Way. And did not provide a comment, but did express support for the variance application. A comment from Jane Erb received May 17th. I'm sorry, May 15th. She resides at 515 Cobby Creek Lane. Also expressed support for the pending variance application. And then there were also copies of two letters that I believe were submitted by the property owner to the neighboring property owners, just to give them an overview of what he was seeking to do with the variance request. And he did ask the neighboring property owners that if they were in support of the request to sign and send that back, and the applicants did send this copy of this to us with their application packet. So there were two of those in there. The first one was signed by William and Elizabeth Sansom. They reside in Knoxville, Tennessee, but they own the property across the street on Bonita Court. And there was a similar letter that came in that was signed by Thomas Daniels, who also owns property near the applicant's property. And those were all the public comments that came in regarding this request. And again, all of them were supportive of the application.
There being no further testimony, the chair will close the public hearing at this time. Having heard all the testimony, do the owners or their representatives have any responses or additional comments? Do any members of the board have any additional questions for the applicant?
No.
Before the board begins deliberation, would the zoning administrator please provide a brief overview of the criteria required by state law, which must be considered by the board in deciding a variance request? Also, would the zoning administrator recite the two conditions that are recommended for attachment to the variance request if the board should vote to approve the request?
Sure. Before I do the requirements for qualifying for a variance, as a matter of practice, I, as zoning administrator, don't typically provide a recommendation in favor or in opposition to granting a request, but I do put some comments in that in the event the board elects to approve the request, just a couple items that I would recommend attaching as conditions. That the first one would be, if approved, that the approved variance shall apply to the building layout as shown on the site-specific plan prepared by the applicants and reviewed by the board during today's meeting. Any modification to the site-specific plan prior to the issuance of a zoning permit from the town or a building permit from the county, with the exception of minor corrections and or modifications which conform to the requirements of the DSO, that those would have to be submitted for further review and approval by the board prior to permitting. The second one is that the variance shall expire on June 5th, 2022, which is 2 years from today's date, if the applicants fail to obtain a building permit on or before that date. My understanding is this is something, well, the property is being renovated, the applicants are seeking to move forward with, I believe without delay. They can correct me if that's wrong. But we do just recommend putting in a vesting period consistent with the state statute just saying that if applicant doesn't exercise the variance and pull a permit, that it would expire after a period of 2 years. The conditions for granting a variance pursuant to section 629, 800A2 of the South Carolina Code of Laws. Board of Zoning Appeals has the power to hear and decide appeals for variance from the requirements of the zoning ordinance when strict application of the provisions of that ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. Variance may be granted in an individual case of unnecessary hardship if the board makes and explains in writing the following findings. A, that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. B, that these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. C, because of these conditions, the application of the zoning ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or restrict the utilization of the property. And D, the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. The board does not have the authority to establish that would not otherwise be permitted or to extend a physically non-conforming use of land or to change the district boundaries on the map. The fact that the property may be utilized more profitably if a variance is granted may not be considered grounds for a variance. Other requirements may be prescribed by the zoning ordinance. And lastly, in granting a variance, the board may attach to it such conditions regarding the location, character, or other features of the proposed building, structure, or use as the board may consider advisable to protect established property values in the surrounding area or to promote the health, safety, or general welfare of the public.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin. The chair will now open the floor for discussion by the board.
Walter, it's Ava. And I would just note, as you guys know, I'm the stickler for those standards. And with the presentation that the homeowner and the architect made and in the application, for each of the standards, I believe they have been met. And I would ask that Joe would make those findings in the record that the, wait, let me get to the criteria again. I'm sorry, I just lost my criteria. The extraordinary conditions being that this was already a non-conforming property, don't generally apply to other property. There are other non-conforming properties, obviously, on the island, but in this case, the proposed variance doesn't extend beyond what is already the encroachment that already exists. So it's a small bump into the bigger bump of the encroachment. The unreasonable restriction is it's a second row ocean property, and many of the other homes have second floor balconies to take advantage of that. And that's a value to the homeowner and to the market value of the house. So it does, to deny it would restrict that. And I don't see a substantial detriment because it's consistent with the character of the neighborhood, and the neighbors have, those neighbors who actually live in that neighborhood, as opposed to some of those other comments who did comment, are supportive. So I would say to my colleagues that I believe that the standards have been met.
I agree with Ava's analysis.
Yes, I agree. Once again, it's built before the town existed, and that always causes a unique situation that brings them to when we get cases in here, so many of them have this same situation. That the DSO has been imposed on a property that was built before in existence.
But I would agree with Joe that those two restrictions or addendums that he read about the, if there's any further modifications, they have to come back and talk to us about them. and that there's a 2-year window on on getting the building permit be included as conditions as well.
Are there any other statements any board member wishes to make? If not, there being no further discussion, the chair will now entertain a motion to vote on request number 163. Please note that a vote in favor of the variance request is an acknowledgement that the request meets the criteria required by state law as previously described by the zoning administrator. Also note that if there is a favorable vote to approve, we will have a second vote on the 2 conditions recommended for attachment. However, should the board vote to deny this request, the issue of the 2 conditions becomes moot. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Do I have
Second,
a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion?
No.
Understand that a yes vote is a vote to approve the request and a no vote is a vote to deny the request. All those in favor, please signify by saying yes.
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 Those opposed by saying no. The results are 5 in favor. There are 0 no votes. The motion is carried. The request is approved. May I have a motion for attaching the 2 conditions?
So moved.
May I
Second,
have a second?
second,
All those in favor of attaching the conditions, please signify by saying yes.
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 Those opposed by saying no. The motion carries. The conditions will be attached. That concludes the hearing of variance request number 163. At this time, we will recess, take a 5-minute break, and reconvene at 3:20 to conduct a hearing for variance request number 164.
And 164 is 2710 Old Oak Walk. So if the applicant's for 163, you're welcome to stay and watch if you want.
Thank you all
But
very
you don't
much.
have to.
Thank you all very much.
We'll get you a written notification in the next few days.
Thank you, Joe, for all your hard efforts. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to apologize for the lawn mowing in the background. The gardeners are here. Maybe they'll be gone in 5 minutes.
You can mute yourself, Janet, when you're not talking in case we hear it.
Well, that's true.
The lower left has a microphone there. You can
Okay,
just-
I see it. I'm gonna do that.
I do it when the dog's barking.
Thank you.
Yep, I'll be right back.
Hey, Joe, can I ask you a quick question? Is there a reason for reading the letters that are included in the packet that we've already had the opportunity to read?
I would recommend doing it just because we're not actually having the public hearing today here in person, and individuals who may be watching the meeting streaming on YouTube may not have seen those comments.
Is there anybody streaming on YouTube?
I can look. As of right now, there are 4 watching.
Okay. I give up.
Hello to those 4. And I believe on the next one, that'll be Andrew and Susan Hodge. I believe you're both on the call.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. And Mike Karamis, I believe, is on the call as well.
Yes, I am here, sir.
Okay, well, you guys will be up next as soon as we come out of recess.
Thank you.
So once you turn the mic on, you can just talk and you're a part of the conversation. Is that right? I'm new to this.
Yeah, if you unmute yourself, if you talk, any noise that's coming through, we'll be able to-
Everybody hears me. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Joe,
Yes.
it's Janet. I have a quick question. I don't expect necessarily that you answer this question at this time. I can give you a call next week if there's something that I need to know, but is there anything special I need to know about disposing of all this paperwork after all these all these hearings?
Disposing, you're supposed to keep it forever so you can keep looking back at it again.
I can go back and see Joe and get the digital version. If there's something I need to know, I'll call you next week. If I can just do whatever I choose with it within.
Yeah, you can do whatever you choose with it. The town retains a copy here.
Okay.
Under the Freedom of Information Act. We retain a copy here. We also have one posted on our website. So if you do dispose of it, you decide you need to go back and look at something or something like that, it'll be on the website. If you don't see it on the website, just give us a call and we can.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. I'll put it in recycling, Bob.
Or you can bring it to Community Shred Day, which will take place in July.
I know. I probably will do that.
Is everybody back? Janet, you look like the gray ghost.
No, I'm here.
We need to shine a light on your face.
Yeah, if you turn some lights on in the room, it'll help.
See, it's better if I turn the lights off.
No, don't say that.
Okay, so everybody's back?
Yep.
Fine. The time is now 3:20 and I'm calling this meeting back to order. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome. I'm Walter Sewell, Chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals. With me today is our Vice Chair, Ava Kleiman, and fellow board members, Bob Leggett, John Fox, and Janet Gorski. Also with us is Joe Cronin, Zoning Administrator for the town of Seabrook Island. Joe will serve as secretary for this hearing. As 5 out of 5 members of the board are present, we resume this meeting having a quorum. At this time, we will begin the hearing of variance number 164 as requested by the applicant, Michael Karamas, architect, and Andrew and Susan Hodge, owners of property located at 2710 Old Oak Walk on Seabrook Island. The nature of this request is for construction of a new screen porch on a portion of an existing deck on the rear of the house. Before we hear testimony from the owners and their representatives, we would ask that our zoning administrator provide an overview of this request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is variance application number 164. Comes from the property owners, Andrew and Susan Hodge, as well as their architect, Michael Karamas. Property location 2710 Old Oak Walk, tax map number 147060058, zoned SR single family residential. purpose of the request is to allow a proposed screen porch to encroach approximately 2.2 feet into the required 25-foot rear yard setback. This is one where there's an existing deck at the rear of the property. I'm just going to jump ahead and pull that up here. On the existing condition survey, which is on 121 of the packet, you'll see the existing house meets all of the ordinary setback requirements, front, rear, both sides. The property does back up to a lake. So there is what's currently an open deck, which does meet the 15-foot setback requirement for an open deck. Basically, what the applicants are seeking to do is enclose a portion of that deck. You'll see in the back that there's two setback lines. The second one is the 25-foot setback, which applies basically to any structure with the exception of open decks. And an open deck can be 15 feet off of the rear property line, which is the second line here. Appears that it's shown as 5 foot, but that's probably just a typo. That's a 15-foot setback off the rear for an open deck. So what's there currently meets all of the setback requirements. You'll see that the existing deck does encroach a little bit over the 25-foot line. That's okay because it's an open deck. Open deck just has to be 15 feet off, as I said. What the applicants are seeking to do is to enclose a portion of that deck. Now, in doing so, by enclosing it, putting a roof over it, it is no longer an open deck, and at that point would have to meet the 25-foot rear yard setback. So I'll just pull up a copy of the building plan, which is on page 123 of your packet. You'll see this red kind of shaded color in the back. That'll be the location of the rear porch. You'll see the darker color, that's actually the extent of the encroachment. At its closest point, you'll see it's about 22.8 feet off of the rear property line. Again, the ordinance requires 25 feet. That's from the closest point. So the roof overhang is encroaching just about 2.2 feet. The wall itself is actually only encroaching about 1.5 feet or a little bit less than 1.5 feet. So because the DSO does require the 25-foot rear yard setback for the porch, this would be non-conforming. So the applicants have requested a variance in order to build that deck and to reduce the rear yard setback by approximately 2.2 feet. Let me just go back up here a little bit. And I know when we had our pre-meeting a couple weeks ago, a question was raised about how far the porch area would be. We know how far it is from the property line, the rear property line. The question was raised about how far how far from the pond would that be located? And the applicant, Mr. Karamis, did provide some additional information that indicated that from the top of the pond, the porch would be approximately a little over 41 feet. In their application, the applicants stated that they felt that this request would qualify for a variance for the following reasons. The first one, the existing home. This was stated in the application. The existing home was constructed prior to the town's incorporation. We actually, when we do the write-up and prepare the agenda packet, we do go and look at it's called the property information card from Charleston County. And one of the records that they have on there is when the home was CO'd, certificate of occupancy. And according to the records, it does appear that it was issued in 1990, which would have been after the town's incorporation. But as I said, the existing home that's there does meet all of the town's current setback requirements and would have met all of them in 1987 as well. B, the home is situated on a water body, and as such, the nearest structure to the rear of the home is approximately 108 feet away. C, the conditions applicable to this lot appear to be unique, given that the home sits on a double lot, resulting in neighboring homes being located much further away and therefore much less affected by the proposed variance request. And when I just had the site plan up a minute ago, you could see it was a pretty sizable lot. It is a double lot that basically is about twice as wide as the other ones in the area. And the home sits pretty much centered, so there is quite a bit of separation on both sides to the neighboring properties. D, strict application of the rear yard setback would result in an awkward visual design for the proposed porch if it had to be designed in order to meet the 25-foot setback. And E, they say that granting of the variance would not be detrimental to adjacent properties or the public good because the porch is at the rear of the home, would not have any impact on the streetscape, that they would be utilizing the existing deck footprint and have more separation from the neighboring structures. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have for me.
That it?
That's it.
Okay. The board will now provide the applicant and their representative with the opportunity to present their request. Will the applicant please state your name and address for the record and then be sworn in?
Is that me, Andrew Hodge, 2710 Old Oak Walk, Seabrook?
Mr. Hyde, do you promise that the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
I do.
Proceed.
Okay, well, you have all the information in front of you. We are proposing to put a screen porch back on our deck, and our desire would be to have it line up with the existing railing, which, of course, as we know, results in a 2.2 foot encroachment on the deck that tapers off to something over 1 foot on the other side. One thing, before I pass it to Mike, our architect, I'd just like to say that the house, as Joe mentioned, is on a double lot, but it's obvious from the original plans to the house, which I hope you all noted when you came to take a look at it, that the previous architect, when the house was built, went to great pains to situate the house so that it would be conform, or actually it would prevent oak trees from being removed. And specifically on the north and south side, on either side of the house, there are massive clumps of oak trees. And in the front of the house, there is a massive oak tree that the front steps, if you've noticed, that they went to great pains to preserve that oak tree. And it's a big lot, as we've already mentioned, and there would have been no reason not to position the house a little closer to the street, Old Oak Walk, other than to have other than to preserve that big oak tree, which I'm sure was an issue at the time the house was built. So that's really my only comment. I think that's a pretty strong argument that for the way the house is positioned, and maybe they didn't think about the 2 feet, or they didn't want to put a screen porch in, but it's pretty obvious that they really tried their best to preserve the existing oak trees when the house was built. That's about all I really had to say, and I can pass it to the architect, Mike, who put some other things on the application.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Karamas, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Please state your name and address for the record, and I'll swear you in.
Michael Karamis, P.O. Box 22026, Charleston, South Carolina, 29413.
Thank you. Do you promise that the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
Proceed.
First off, I'd like to acknowledge that Joe found my mistake. I was misread the county information when I stated that the house was built before the town. I stand corrected and did not do that intentionally. As the owner noted, it's obvious that when the house was sited there, they went to lengths to save the great oak trees that are there, resulting in the house being a little bit further to the back. Also, being that the house is on a lake, the separation distance between the homes is much greater than if they were two lots backing up to one another. So that instead of a required 50-foot setback distance between two structures in the rear yard, from the tax map from the county website, I got that it was about 108 feet from the corner of our variance request to the corner of the deck that we're looking at straight across right now, and about 160 feet across from the other corner of the screen porch to that house's neighbor. So we're a good bit away from any of the neighbors, certainly not going to affect them. And there's a great deal of existing vegetation that's on the edge of the lake as well. And also the being centered in the double lot mitigates any ill effects on the neighboring properties to either side. And basically what we're trying to do is utilize as much of the existing structure as we can without having to pull the screen porch back 2 feet, have an awkward situation where the handrails stop, turn back towards the house, then we have our screen porch, then the deck goes back out to where it is, and we have a funny little hole where we've put the screen porch. And that's all I have to add, sir.
Thank you.
You're
Before
welcome.
we open the hearing for public comment, does any member of the board have any questions for the applicant or their representative?
No, thank you.
Anyone else? At this time, we will open the hearing for public comment. If there is anyone who wishes to speak in favor of this request, please state your name and address for the record and then be sworn in. Anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this request? Anyone who wishes to speak either in favor of or opposition to this request?
I can read the comments that came in advance of the meeting. That's all right.
Please.
We had received a similar letter for this one from Katrina at the POA. Language is very similar, so I'm not going to read the entire thing, but she did state that while the ARC has not yet thoroughly reviewed the plans after a cursory review aside from the setback and variance issue at hand, she found no fundamental issues or reasons that the request would not be approved pending a successful variance request. Additionally, since the screen porch addition would not increase the heated square footage or overall footprint, would only require staff review and approval and would not have to go to the ARC for review. The other comment we received came from the architect, the applicant, and that was where he was providing the additional information following our meeting on May 18th, just giving the measurement from the rear of the addition to the lake, the edge of the lake, which we had already stated. Those were the only comments that came in for that one.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin. Having heard all the testimony, do the applicants or their representatives have any responses or additional?
No, sir.
Before the board begins deliberation, would the zoning administrator please provide a brief overview of the criteria required by state law, which must be considered by the board in deciding a variance request? Also, would the zoning administrator recite the 2 conditions that are recommended for attachment to the variance request if the board should vote to approve the request?
Sure. I won't read them word for word like I did last time, but the recommended 2 conditions are essentially the same as we had for the first request, that if approved, the variance would apply to the layout shown on the site-specific plan. Any changes from that, unless they were just minor, modifications, or if they conform to the DSO, then they would have to be brought back to the board for additional review. And then second, basically the 2-year, the applicant would have 2 years in which to exercise the approval and pull the permit. So it would, if they did not pull the permit by June 5th of 2022, then the variance would expire. The criteria, same as I said before, the board can grant a variance if they make a determination there's a case of unnecessary hardship. You're looking for documentation and demonstration that there's extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the property, that those conditions do not apply to other property in the vicinity. Because of those conditions, a strict application would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict utilization. And lastly, the authorization of the variance would not be of substantial detriment to the neighboring property owner or the public good. Again, board can't take profitability into consideration, and you do have the authority to attach conditions if you elect to approve the variance.
Thank you. The chair will now open the floor for discussion by the board.
I'd like to comment.
Please.
When I got in my car, I was taken by the oak trees. I've built numerous houses around oak trees, and it's a difficult situation. You can't get too close to the tree, or you cut too much root to kill the tree. And I immediately knew why when I got out of my car and looked at the house, I knew why we had a variance request. Was in that house was perfectly suited to allow these 3 giant oak trees to flourish. And if you look, I looked at the plat, and it appears they could have, if they hadn't cared about the oak tree in the front, they could have squared that house up and wouldn't have needed a variance at this time. And I think the extraordinary circumstance are the trees and the effort that was made to save them.
And I also think that unlike lots of other properties, at the rear of this property, I think there's a small strip of property before you get to the lagoon itself that SAPOA owns. And then you have the whole lagoon, so that the distance to any of the properties to the rear is gigantic. I mean, it's way bigger than this setback requirement in terms of proximity to a neighbor. And I think that's pretty different than what exists in a lot of other places. And Mr. Karamis and Mr. Hodge both indicated that they could build this porch within and still meet the setback requirement, but it wouldn't look as well aesthetically. And for mostly an overhang of the at the roof line, it didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I didn't pull it up on the screen, but on the building drawings, you can see basically the footprint of the porch would go out to the edge of the existing deck. Really, the majority of the encroachment is going to be from the overhang on the roof, but you can see it's not going any closer to the rear property line than that existing, the walls or the supports of it are not going any closer to the rear line than the existing footprint of the deck.
Yeah. And I would just say that the comments of my colleagues have gone through the criteria of extraordinary conditions, don't generally apply to other properties. Everything that John and Janet said apply to those. The awkward design would be, that would be unreasonable to require an awkward design like that. And it would not be a substantial detriment because the neighbors are so far away.
Any additional discussion?
I guess the only other thing is that I think we should include the two additional
Just do.
conditions, as we've discussed before.
Certainly. Any other discussion? There being no further discussion, the chair will now entertain a motion to vote on variance request number 164. Please note that a vote in favor of the variance request is an acknowledgement that the request meets the criteria required by state law as previously described by the zoning administrator. Also note that if there's a favorable vote to approve, we will have a second vote on the two conditions recommended for attachment. However, should the board vote to deny this request, the issue of the conditions becomes moot. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second,
We have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? Understand that a yes vote is a vote to approve the request and a no vote is a vote to deny the request. All those in favor, please signify by saying yes.
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 Those opposed by saying no. The results are 5 in favor and no votes. It's approved. May I have a motion for attaching the two conditions?
So move.
May I have a second?
Second,
All those in favor of attaching the conditions, please signify by saying yes.
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 Those opposed by saying no. The motion carries. The conditions will be attached. That concludes the hearing of variance request number 164. At this time, we will recess, take a 5-minute break and reconvene at approximately 3:50 to conduct the hearing for variance request number 165.
Thank you very much for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Enjoy your porch.
Joe, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What was that at the end with the two conditions? I don't know. I didn't understand that.
Those were the two conditions that I put in the staff recommendation. One was if there's any substantive change to the design or the layout, then it would have to come back to the board unless those changes meet the zoning requirements. The second one that if a building permit was not pulled within 2 years, then the variance would expire. But as long as you pull a permit and start acting on the approval, then the variance will stay forever.
Oh, good. That's no problem. That's great. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I think for the next one, we have, let's see, Robert and Lynn Minor are on the call.
Yes.
Hi.
Hey, how are you? And you said PAL 50 was
That's Tim Lato.
Tim Lato.
PAL 50.
the architect.
Right.
Okay. We'll get to you guys in just a couple minutes.
Thanks.
I assume everybody's back. The time is now 3:50. I'm calling this meeting back to order. For those of you that are just joining us, welcome. I'm Walter Sewell, Chairman of the Board of Zoning Appeals. With me today is our Vice Chair, Ava Kleinman, and fellow board members, Bob Leggett, John Fox, and Janet Gorski. Also with us is Joe Cronin, Zoning Administrator for the town of Seabrook Island. Joe will serve as secretary for this hearing. As 5 out of 5 board members are present, we resume this meeting with having a quorum. At this time, we will begin the hearing of variance number 165 as requested by Robert and Lynn Minor for their property located at 2385 The Hollover on Seabrook Island. The nature of this request is to add a screen porch onto a portion of an existing deck on the rear of the house. Before we hear testimony from the owners, we would ask that our zoning administrator provide an overview of this request. Mr. Cronin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is variance application number 165. Owners are Robert and Lynn Minor. Properties located at 2385 The Hollover, tax map number 147030020. Property zoned SR, single family residential, and the purpose, very similar to the last one, basically wanting to convert a portion of an existing deck at the rear of the house from a deck to screen porch. Basically, the existing deck encroaches into the rear yard setback, and they are seeking approval or a variance to reduce the rear yard setback in order for the enclosed porch structure to encroach into the 25-foot rear yard setback. So very similar to the last one. This one's just situated a little bit differently than the last one. The existing deck's going to be closer to that rear property line, but a similar situation to the last one. According to the county's tax records, the existing home was built in 1979. Of course, the town was incorporated in 1987. So the house that's there, while it does not conform to the town's current setback requirements, it did predate the town and was developed under the county's zoning jurisdiction. So any nonconformities that are there on the property today would be considered grandfathered. For the proposed porch at its closest point, the roof overhang would be about 13 feet from the rear property line. This one also has a pond at the rear, and similar to the last one, this one's going to be a pretty good distance away from the top of the pond. So even though it's only 13 feet from the rear property line, it's going to be approximately 45 feet from the top of the pond. So they're requesting a reduction in the rear yard 25-foot setback. The existing home does comply with the 30-foot front yard setback and the 15-foot side yard setback on the right side of the home. The existing deck, a portion of which is proposed to be enclosed and covered, I put in there it substantially complies with the 15-foot setback requirement, might be within a foot or so. But the left side and the rear of the home are both non-conforming currently. The closest point of the home is 8 feet from the rear property line. So this one, kind of another similarity to the first variance request that we have, that while it will be encroaching into the rear yard setback, the 25-foot rear yard setback, it's actually still going to be further from that rear property line than another portion of the house. So the applicants are seeking a reduction in the 25-foot rear yard setback from DSO section 760-2030. The applicants have stated that they're seeking relief for the following reasons. A, that the existing home was constructed prior to the town's incorporation, and moving the home to accommodate the current setback requirements would be prohibitive. B, the conditions do not apply to other properties in the vicinity due to the home being one of the oldest in the neighborhood. C, strict application of the rear yard setback requirement would prohibit the applicants from enjoying the outdoors without protection from insects that a screen porch would provide. And D, the adjacent property is owned by the Seabrook Island Club, which has submitted a letter in support of the applicant's variance request. So just a quick review of the site plan. These are the existing conditions for the property. You can see the property sits way to the far back off of the right-of-way for the haulover. You'll see the existing rear. If you're looking from the street, this would be the rear left corner of the house. You can see it's only about 8 feet or so from the rear property line. The portion that they're seeking to enclose, portion of the deck that they're seeking to enclose will be back in this area. So while it will be encroaching into the rear setback, it will actually be less of an encroachment than the existing structure is today. And let me just pull up the site plan. This is the site plan. You can see this in the as-built was all deck. They're proposing to convert this portion of the deck into the enclosed screen porch over here. Again, like the last one, pretty much within the same footprint of the existing deck. You can see while it is going to be closer to the property line than required, the only thing behind it is property owned by the golf club, and there is a pond at the rear. And you can see there's quite a bit additional separation between the pond and the back of the proposed porch. And there were also a couple drawings in here just to show you some different views. So again, on this bottom one here, you can see where it would be coming off the rear of the property, basically lining up within the footprint of the existing deck. Same thing on the other side. And like I said, very similar to the last one. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
The board will now provide the owners with the opportunity to present their request. Will the owners please state your name and address for the record and then be sworn in?
Robert Minor, 2385 The Hallover, Seabrook.
Do you promise that the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you. First, let me thank the board and in particular Joe and Katrina, who have helped us kind of guide through this whole process. It's been very helpful. The purpose of this is to provide us with a protected environment. We've enjoyed the property tremendously, and we've enjoyed being and seeing the lagoon. And we've just found that sitting out there, it sometimes is, unless there's any breeze, is almost prohibitive. So we thought that our solution was in having a screened area to the deck and adding it as a porch. So and that was really the purpose of our endeavor here. We're also working on another piece to add garage space to make that possible. But it was really more than anything else to avoid the bugs and really to be able to enjoy the back as much as we possibly could. With me here is Tim Latto, who is our architect, and I'll turn it over to him unless you have any questions for me.
Well, of course, It's kind of hard to,
Please state your name and address for the record,
yes,
and
sir,
I'll swear
sorry.
you in.
Tim Lato, 842 Captain Tom's Crossing, Johns Island.
Do you promise the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, sir.
Please proceed.
Well, like I was going to say, as everybody knows, you can't enjoy the outdoors anywhere in the coastal area of South Carolina without being carried off by mosquitoes. Last time I was out there, I heard one mosquito talking to the other one. It says, let's carry him out in the back. Says, well, if we do that, then the big ones will get him. But anyway, the screen porch is directly, the footprint of the screen porch is on the end of that existing deck. And there are patio doors leading into the house at that area. So we think that's a very good logical place to put the screen porch. And of course, finishes and roof and all that will be match exactly as we can. You know, the existing roof, and of course paint colors will be, will match the finishes of the existing house. It's a simple structure, just some verticals with a screen around, and a hipped roof up above attached to the house, which will give it vertical stability of that particular structure. So with that, requesting if you'll give us approval to this.
Before we open it, excuse me, are you finished?
I'm finished, thank you.
Yeah. Before we open the hearing for public comment, does any member of the board have any questions for the owners or their representative? At this time, we will open the hearing for public comment. If there's anyone who wishes to speak in favor of this request, please state your name and address and then be sworn in. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this request? Anyone who wishes to speak either in favor of or opposition to this request?
At this point, I can read the public comments that came in, if that's all right.
Please do.
Let me just pull those up here on the screen. So when I was given my overview, I did state that the property backed up to property owned by the Seabrook Island Club. We did receive a letter from Sean Hardwick, who's the director of golf course maintenance for the Seabrook Island Club. And he stated, per the request of the applicants, the club had reviewed the property located at 2385 The Hollover regarding the request to screen in a portion of the back said porch, but it's currently an open deck, which faces a lagoon on the golf course. He stated this letter is to grant the miners permission to proceed with the variance needed for the project. So did not express any concern or objection from the adjacent property owner, being the club. We received a request or correspondence from Richard Creedon on May 10th. This one came in by email. Said we are pleased to support this request and wish the miners many years of happiness with their new screened rear porch and safe from the no-see-ums too. On May 29th, we received a copy of the letter from Katrina at the ARC, similar to the last one, basically saying that this is something that could be reviewed and approved by staff at the ARC, and didn't see any concerns or issues other than the variance, which was currently pending. And then this was the one where we had one that came in after the agenda went out. I'll pull that one up on the screen. That one came from Ann Edwards at 3208 Wood Duck Place. She stated that she was in favor of the variance request, and her comment was, my home is across the lagoon from the miner's property, and I'm fully supportive of the plan as submitted. And those were the only comments that we received in advance of the meeting.
Nice. We share alligators.
Is that it? Is that it, Joe?
Yep.
Yeah. Having heard all the testimony, do the applicants have any responses or additional comments?
No,
Thank you for
Thank you.
working with us. We appreciate meeting everyone.
You're welcome. Before the board begins deliberations, would the zoning administrator please provide a brief overview of the criteria required by state law, which must be considered by the board in deciding a variance request? Also, would the zoning administrator recite the 2 conditions that are recommended for attachment to the variance request if the board should vote to approve the request?
Sure. The recommended conditions, I'll hit those first. Basically, the same as the previous 2 variances that came before you. Pull them up on the screen here. That if approved, the variance would apply to the building layout as shown on the site-specific plan prepared by the applicants and reviewed during the meeting today. Any substantive changes to the plans other than those which are minor in nature or those which conform to the DSO setback requirements would have to come back for additional review and approval by the board. And the second recommended condition was that the applicants would have 2 years in which to exercise and move forward by pulling a permit and initiating construction on the porch addition. If that was not pulled before June 5th of 2022, then the variance would expire. The 4 criteria, same as they were for the first 2 requests today. You're looking for extraordinary and exceptional conditions, that the conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. And because of those conditions, strict application of the ordinance would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict use of the property, and that the variance, if approved, would not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property owners or to the public good.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin. The chair will now open the floor for discussion by the board.
It's Janet. I just want to make one clarifying observation because I don't know who knows this. I live around the corner from this property, but I live around the corner from it. I'm not an adjacent property owner, and until yesterday, I'd never met the miners, but I just wanted to clarify that because this property is, as the crow flies, is pretty close to where I live. So I just wanted to make sure that the record's clear on that I'm not an adjacent property owner. I don't want anybody to think there's a conflict.
Thanks, Janet.
No problem. Other than that, I'd have the same observations as on the last property from my site visit, that the house is sited very far back from the haulover, from the streetway. And from all the trees that are on the map, I'm guessing that a lot of that was just to keep the home site very private and very well screened, which it is. There's a lot of trees on this property. Also, because the club owns property behind the property, between the rear property line and the lagoon, this deck is really quite far from any of the other neighbors. They're not increasing the size of the deck, so they're not building anything that brings it closer to the water or closer to the rear property line. And I thought all those things were pretty important.
I think the largest problem here is that this house was built when it only took developer approval. And so it was sited down on that corner to get the best view down the lake. Now it's to the detriment of the current homeowner that was allowed and gives them kind of an unfair situation when the DSO is applied over it. It makes them almost unable to do anything with this house.
Well, that's what makes a reason to grant the variance, because there's an extraordinary situation here.
Well, that's what my point.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would follow along these, the four conditions. There are certainly extraordinary conditions because the age of the house and where it was situated and how it abuts the current setbacks and is so close that they can't really do much with improvements without a variance. Certainly doesn't apply generally to other properties. This is a very unusual lot. When I saw it, I didn't know we had lots like this, an acre lot that, the house set back onto this lovely lake. I never saw a house like this on Seabrook before.
You could miss that house driving by easily.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously with the mosquito situation and with people spending time at home so much nowadays, the restriction, would unreasonably restrict their enjoyment, the quiet enjoyment of the property, not to be able to put some screening on, and particularly because there's no detriment to any neighbors. They're so far away. The ones who have commented are in support. So I think all the four criteria have been met.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there any further discussion? There being no further discussion, the chair will now entertain a motion to vote on variance request number 165. Please note that a vote in favor of the variance request is an acknowledgement that the request meets the criteria as required by state law, as previously described by the zoning administrator. Also note that if there is a favorable vote to approve, we'll have a second vote on the two conditions recommended for attachment. However, should the board vote to deny this request, the issue of the two conditions becomes moot. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? Understand that a yes vote is a vote to approve the request and a no vote is a vote to deny the request. All those in favor, please signify by saying yes.
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 Those opposed by saying no. The results are 5 votes in favor, no votes. The motion is carried. The variance is approved. May I have a motion on attaching the two conditions?
So move.
May I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of attaching the conditions, please signify by saying yes.
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 Those opposed by saying no. Motion carried. The conditions will be attached. That concludes the hearing of variance request number 165. There being no further business, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying yes.
Yes.
The motion carries, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you a
everybody.
lot.
Happy Friday.
Have a good
Thank you
weekend.
so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, people.
Welcome.
Thank
Good
you.
job, everybody.
You
Hope I see
too,
you
Walter.
again.
Bye.
Okay.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Katrina.
Good luck.
Glad when this.
Thank you. We're excited.
Good.
Okay.
Enjoy your porch.
And watch out for the alligator.
We will.
That we will.
Bye, Tim.
Bye. Good seeing you.
Okay, we'll see you soon.
Right.